And behold, we discover that Joseph is still alive, and now Jacob is aware of this fact and has been requested by Pharaoh, by Joseph, please come on down to Egypt. You'll have a life there, bring your family. And although Isaac was forbidden from going to Egypt and had to remain in the land of Canaan, Jacob is granted permission in a dream. And here's the thing. This is entirely about today. Al tira lared Mitzrayim. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, says the dream, a vision of God. Vayomer, I am the God of your ancestors. Al tira merda Mitzrayim, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. Ki lagoy gadol asimcha sham, because a great nation will you become there. I will go down with you into Egypt, and I will bring you up. Yes, indeed, bring you up. And Joseph, in the interim, will support you. You know, the word Mitzrayim is often seen as a narrow place, Meitzar, something in which we are compressed in space and size, in which we are forcing ourselves through a narrow channel, something we typically wouldn't want to do, but we have no choice. When we have the 3 weeks during the summer, you may not be familiar with the 3 weeks, but the 3 weeks begin on the 17th of the month of Tammuz and go all the way until the end of the 9th day of Av. And those 3 weeks are a mourning period. And they're a mourning period for many of the terrible stories of Jewish life and Jewish history, the destruction of the temples and various terrible things that befell the Jewish people. And they've been amalgamated into this 3-week period, and it comes during the summer. And when you're in these 3 weeks, they are known as Bein HaMitzarim, between the travails or between the pressures. And these 3 weeks represent that narrowing of life's opportunities and possibilities. So, for example, people don't shave. There's a form of mourning. They don't do business deals. They will not conclude a business deal. Some people won't fly or travel during the 9 days, which is the last 9 days of the 3 weeks. People believe it's actually just a non-fortuitous time. It is Bein HaMitzarim. It is in the narrows, so to speak. And some people during the 9 days don't bathe. They might shower, but they wouldn't bathe. They wouldn't get a haircut. They wouldn't buy new clothing. They wouldn't wear new clothing. Some people don't do laundry. It depends how observant you are. And I remember we used to go to summer camp. And it was always a bad year when we had the 3 weeks during our session. The girls often had their month and we had our month, because that meant that there was no music, or there was, we wouldn't get the full extent of the summer because there was no swimming during the 9 days, and so on. So Bein HaMitzarim was something that we understood, that it was a time of deep, deep compression of our spirit. And Mitzrayim is seen as that same compression of spirit. Here they went from being free in their land to being compressed in Egypt. But the promise made to Jacob is, ultimately, good things will happen. And it's hard to really see how this promise allayed the concern. Initially, when they arrived down in Egypt, everything turns out fine. Their brother is the boss. He gives them the best land in the land of Goshen. And all this story is told in the Haggadah every year. And they get the land, and other than the priests of Egypt, it was the brothers of Joseph who had freedom. And they had the best land for grazing their sheep. Egyptians wanted nothing to do with sheep herding. It was considered an abomination. They were left alone in their own territory, in their own province, to do what they wished. Until Vayakam melech chadash al Mitzrayim. In the book of Exodus, we begin, a new king arose over Egypt, Asher lo yada et Yosef, who didn't know Joseph. Now, it's impossible to suggest he didn't know Joseph. How could he not know Joseph? Joseph was the one who saved Egypt. Joseph was the one who turned them around from certain death and starvation into a flourishing economy in which everybody was successful. Joseph developed an extraordinary tax system. Everyone was a vassal of the king. They got to keep their land, and in return for keeping their land, 1/5 of all produce went to the state, which the state distributed to those who didn't have, to those who were unsuccessful. There were taxes to be paid, and Joseph got absolute loyalty from his subjects because they appreciated the fact that they were given an opportunity to remain alive and successful, and they were able to keep cultivating their land. So Joseph engenders this incredible popular support in which it says the citizens came to him and said, "Hechiyatanu, you've kept us alive. You kept us alive. We are slaves. We are indebted to you forever." And Joseph said, "I'm not going to take advantage of you. You're not going to work and give me everything you earn. You keep 4, I keep 1. The 1 goes to the state. It supports the economy." And Joseph created this. He created the system in which the priests didn't pay taxes. No different than we have today, in which religious institutions don't pay taxes. Certainly not property tax. There were many things that Joseph did, and it was impossible to believe that they had entirely written Joseph out of history. Certainly not that quickly, in which Joseph dies. Vayakam melech hadash. Joseph's gone. The next king, Asher lo yada et Yosef. Is it imaginable he didn't know Joseph? Of course he knew Joseph. He acted as if he didn't know Joseph. In other words, it was time for something new. The story of Mitzrayim is not just that it was a compression of the soul or the spirit. The story of Mitzrayim is it was a compression of history. It destroyed the most important attribute of Egypt, which was the idea that xenophobic country, like Egypt at the time, who, if you see the story of why Joseph could not sit with his brothers and eat, why could he not sit? The text tells us, because it is to'avat Mitzrayim, it is an abomination in Egypt to eat bread or to break bread with a foreigner. Egyptians and foreigners were not the same people. They could not be together. They couldn't marry, they couldn't intermingle, they couldn't be part of the same society, they couldn't eat bread together. They couldn't graze sheep. Foreigners were foreign, and they had to be kept separate. Mitzrayim was in some ways crushing to the non-Egyptian. But here is this Hebrew who rises up from the depths of a prison and becomes the king's right-hand man and saves the country and gets loyalty like no one else. And yet, the moment he was gone, Asher lo yada et Yosef, they wouldn't even acknowledge him. And all the work that had been done to turn Egypt from this segregated country in which power was the dominant force, in which subjugation of the population was the powerful force, in which empire building was the powerful force, in which Joseph succeeded at all that, all the good work he had done was narrowed, like Mitzrayim, into a has-been. And Egypt sunk back into its xenophobia. And the beginning of Exodus says, let's think about it. Hava nitchakmalo. Let's outsmart them. What are we going to do to outsmart them? Well, we'll enslave them. We'll remove them from their territory. We'll remove them from their special privilege. We'll remove them from their rights. What we will do, we will enslave the Hebrews. That way, despite the fact that they're a growing force, and under Joseph they enjoyed political rights, and they enjoyed property rights, and they enjoyed economic rights, despite all that, we'll strip it away from them. We will lo yada et Yosef. We will not acknowledge the movement of Joseph towards embracing the other. No. they reverted to old school, and they put them to work, and they enslaved them. That is our story. We are a people that emerged from Mitzrayim. Depending on how you read history, it was either 400 years, 210 years. That's an awful long time for a people to be enslaved. They did a really, really, really good job enslaving the Jewish people, so that when Moses arrives, he has to really, truly recreate not only their sense of spiritual identity and religious identity and theological identity, but their human identity, their moral identity. They are bereft of their own sense of who they are, other than knowing that they're Hebrews. They have a style of food, dress, naming conventions. But other than that, they were almost entirely under the thumb of Egypt. So when Joseph does all his great work, he must have imagined, this will live on beyond me. There's no way Egypt's going to flip over and go backwards. There's no way. His family was there. They were the test case for foreign engagement. Everyone knew now that Joseph was not Egyptian. Maybe they thought he was Egyptian. Who knows? They knew that he was a Hebrew. They reference it in jail. But maybe once he came out of jail and the king appointed him, the spin was, no, not a Hebrew. He may be raised by Hebrews, but he's an Egyptian. There was no way he could have been in power without being an Egyptian. And suddenly, not only does Joseph reveal himself to his brothers, he has to reveal himself to Pharaoh, and consequently to the population. He's a foreigner. And that is why Lo yada et Yosef. The change was just too great for Egypt to bear. They could have handled an Egyptian being in charge. They could have handled it coming from within, maybe. Maybe they paid loyalty only while he was alive and then it reversed. But at least, maybe they could say it was our people. But the idea that he was a Hebrew, he was a foreigner, he came to these ideas and brought them from the outside, that had to be reversed. And that is the dynamic of the power shift. Lo yada et Yosef, they wouldn't acknowledge Joseph because he was no longer Tzafnat Paneach. He was no longer known by his Hebrew name, by his Egyptian name. He was known by his Hebrew name, Yosef. And that couldn't be tolerated. So friends, this is relevant today. We are living in Mitzrayim. COVID has narrowed our lives and squeezed us. We are now in full lockdown for 28 more days. We don't know whether we will emerge from this and go back into lockdown. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know whether the vaccine will take hold the way we imagine. We hope it does. And I'm not here to give medical advice. That you speak to your doctor. I'm not here to give you scientific evaluations. I'm here only to talk about what I know, which is synagogue life. And it's been since mid-March that I've been talking to a camera. Trust me, the idea that I have to feed all my energy that used to fill a room into a camera this big, I feel the Mitzrayim as I'm squeezing my feelings through to a broad audience. I feel a crushing sense of emptiness that does not allow this to feel entirely real, but to hope that someday it will be. I'm hoping that just like Egypt, we will have an exodus soon. I'm hoping that we find a way to return to the expanse of Jewish life and Jewish identity. But until then, friends, it's a narrow place. Everything about COVID has narrowed our lives, our relationships, our friendships, our sense of meaning, our sense of well-being. Everything that we detect in the world around us, everything that we sense is uncertain. Everything. And there's no certainty what happens when we return. Nobody has any certainty about the economy, about people who are out of work, about mental health, about all the challenges that we work so hard to fix during good times, we will inevitably have a lot more work to do. This is Mitzrayim. And when we return, will we be the people, Asher lo yada et Yosef, who don't know Joseph, who won't acknowledge that we went through this, who won't acknowledge that we've had a great opportunity for change, who just want to get back to normal so badly that they won't ask themselves the question, was the normal so good? I'm asking myself that question all the time. Was the normal so good? And I'm thinking in the arena of Jewish life and Jewish identity. I'm thinking all the time, what will it feel like? Will it just be back to the same old, same old? Will we just come back to shul and just do the same thing? Or are we indelibly changed because we've been in Mitzrayim, we've been squeezed, we've been crushed, we've been bent into a shape we never predicted? We've had to learn how to be Jewish inside. There is no outside. We've had to learn how to be Jewish from within our own feelings, because there is no one there to show us or tell us how to do it other than through the Mitzrayim of technology. And I wonder, what does the future hold beyond COVID, beyond vaccine, beyond good health? I think about this all the time, as I've said, and I've been writing about it. Living Jewishly is where I'm publishing an article in the next few days or weeks or so on this subject. And I want your feedback. I want to know. I want to know what you think. What changes are coming? How have you changed? How has Judaism changed for you? How has tradition changed for you? One thing is for certain. This is not what I thought I'd be doing on sabbatical. I'm off now. You know, if you write to me after shul or during the week, you'll get an auto reply. I'm not answering emails. I'm off. But I'm not off, you see. And the reason I'm not off is because it's too important. It's too important to share and connect and keep this relationship. To go dark is not an option. I need the connection just as much as you do. And as hard as it is to build and talk and engage and energize, it's worth it. I feel I have something to offer, and seemingly the way that we've connected, you feel the same way. But it is Mitzrayim, you know. So, the fact that there's change coming does not necessarily mean it's a bad thing. I remember I had a friend in California she was a wardrobe consultant to Hollywood. Fascinating job. And she called me one day and said, you know, my brother died. I said, I'm terribly sorry. She said, but I want to tell you what he said before he died. He said, at his church group, where he was the lay leader, he said, change is coming, and change is good. We are all changed. Change is happening. Change will be good. Every one of you, I'm asking you, I'm urging you, don't forget this moment. Don't forget these moments of Mitzrayim. Because the promise that we have in this week's portion is, you will go down to Egypt and you will emerge a great people. It doesn't say they'll be slaves for so long and then they'll emerge and they'll suffer tremendously and their firstborn will be killed and they will be brutalized. It doesn't say that. But ultimately, the belief is they will emerge a better people. And we have the right to believe that. And we have to demand of ourselves that we manifest that. We must emerge stronger from Mitzrayim, or else we cannot claim to be Am Yisrael, the people who wrestle and struggle to achieve greatness. In today's Haftorah, from the book of Ezekiel, the most graphically intense prophet who tells stories with visuals like none other, wants to get across the point that the Jewish people will once again be reunited. And he says, I had a vision. You, son of man, is how Ezekiel understood his role, the son of man. Ben Adam, kach lecha etz echad, take for yourself one stick and write upon it, Judah. And for Israel, which is the rest of the 12 tribes, it was Judah and Israel. Write on it, Israel. And for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim and all the house of Israel and his companions. In other words, the schism between Judah and Joseph that we see in today's portion lasts long beyond Egypt. And it continues throughout the uniting of the Jewish people, the Israelites under Moses. There's still tension. Ultimately, the question being, who is going to rule over Egypt, over Israel? And first it was Saul from the house of Benjamin, which is Joseph and Israel. And then it reverts to King David from the tribe of Judah. And this tension was unresolved. If you read the Tanakh, the various books of the Torah, you'll discover the long history of tension between the tribe of Judah and the others, eventually culminating in the exile of the 10 tribes by Sancherib to parts unknown and the loss of a large part of the Jewish people to history. Judah dominates. That's why we're called Jewish. We come from Judea. But there's a hope, says Ezekiel, that I will be able to restore the people as one. Take those sticks, he says, and put them together. Make them into one. In other words, it's time. And as the commentator says, it's time for a spiritual reunion. It's not time for a political reunion. We know our identity. We're Jewish. We all suffer the same challenges of being Jewish under COVID and in a country which is not a Jewish country, in which we're beset by anti-Semitism and the challenges of being the other and the foreigner. We all know that. That does not need to be explained. What needs to be explained is why we need a spiritual reunion. Because now that we've left our geographic location, our spiritual homes where our identity used to reside in synagogue, and we've moved indoors, so to speak, we have created a disjointed spirituality, one which is no longer common, one which is no longer unified, one which is now a self-expression. And we need a spiritual reunion when COVID is over. We need to hug each other. We need to love each other. We need to see each other. We need to be connected. But we also need a spiritual reunion. And my goal, if I can do anything to help, will be to help bring that spiritual reunion to us as a congregation, as a community, as a people. We're going to leave Mitzrayim. We're going to leave Mitzrayim and be a strong people once again. We're going to find a way to reunite. We're going to find a way to incorporate the changes we've made. We're going to make new choices. We're going to make different choices. And when we leave as a people, we will disagree. There will not be unity until we try. Until we build together that spiritual reunion that says we've all been through Mitzrayim together, we must find common ground. I wish you all courage and strength as we go into the lockdown. I wish you all safe and good health. I wish you all firm resolve to get through this, and I hope that you will not forget the changes that have come upon you and bring that into our spiritual reunion that is coming soon, speedily in our day. Amen. Shabbat Shalom. Please join me, page 400, Ein Keloheinu. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kimalkeinu, Ein Kimoshienu, Mi Keloheinu, Mi Chadonenu, Mi Chimalkeinu, Mi Chimoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Imalkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shektiru Avosenu, Lifahanecha Eskitores Hasamim. Leman Achayvere Dabna Shalom Bach, Leman Besadna Levak Shetavlach, Adonai Zlamo Yitana Nevarech, Samoh Vashalom. Please rise if you'd like, page 402, Aleinu, which will be followed by Yortzites and Mourner's Kaddish. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon akol, l'seis gedula yotzei bereshit, shelo asanu k'gayei oratzos, v'lo samanu k'mishpachos adama, shelo samchakeinu kahem, v'gahor aleinu k'chol hamonam, v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu, shechnu teshamayim yozed haaretz, moshe v'gorah mishmayim himoshe. Ne'emar v'hoyo Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz bayomahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Observe this week Florence Wilder, mother and mother-in-law of Charlene Wilder and Sheldon Freeman. George Dargo, father and father-in-law of Jessica Dargo Kaplan and Jody Kaplan. Joan Lazarus, mother and mother-in-law of Robert Solomon and Sherry Wirt. Max Appleton, grandfather of David Appleton. Annette Honey Saul, mother and mother-in-law of Jordan and Sandy Saul. David Benjamin Kushner, father and father-in-law of Stephen Kushner and April Woolner Kushner. Ernie Goodman, father and father-in-law of Mark and Ann Goodman. Kate Simmons Brooks, grandmother of Tulsa Greenberg. Rose Tchaikovsky, mother and mother-in-law of Penny and Ephraim Fixel. Gail Reinstein, mother and mother-in-law of Shelley and Paul Tashinsky. Guy Cohen, husband of Esther Lebovic and father of Brandon and Jacob Cohen. Isidore Shore, father and father-in-law of Jack Shore and Karen Ogolnik. Izzy Fine, father and father-in-law of Sandra and Ronald Traub. Jack Wasser, father and father-in-law of Eddie and Deborah Wasser. Joe Gerskup, brother and brother-in-law of Alan and Maida Gerskup, and father-in-law of Marlene and Sheldon Cooper. Joseph Leaf, father and father-in-law of Susan Leaf and Joel Raskin. Marlene Berkeley, mother and mother-in-law of Harvey and Laura Berkeley. Frida Feldman, grandmother of Sherry Wirt. Morris Ehrenberg, father and father-in-law of Galia Ehrenberg and Alan Hornfeld. Philip Turk, husband of Alina Turk, father of Helen Turk, father and father-in-law of Larry and Cindy Turk, Sally and David Laren. Brother-in-law of Sandra Turk, brother and brother-in-law of Harry and Penina Turk, and uncle of Stephen and Marvin Turk. Joseph Friedman, father and father-in-law of Stanley and Melissa Friedman. Lyle Hay, father and father-in-law of Vicky and Stephen Rothman. Wilfred Jarofsky, father and father-in-law of David and Haley Jarofsky. In solemn testimony to the unbroken faith which links the generations one to another, let those who mourn and those who have Yortzeit continue now with reciting the Mourner's Kaddish. In solemn testimony to the unbroken faith which links the generations one to another, let those who mourn, those who have Yortzeit, please rise and join me to recite the Mourner's Kaddish. It may be found on page 410. Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbah, v'yamad divrach Yerusei v'yamlich malchusei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol beis Yisrael, v'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach li'olam olomei omaya. Yisbarach v'yishtabach v'yispa'ar v'yisramam v'yisnasei v'yisadar v'yisalev v'yisalal shemei d'kudsha barichu le'ela min kol birchasa v'shirasa Tushbachasa v'nechamasa damiran b'yalma v'yimru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. A year of peace and comfort to all. Our weekly bulletin comes to your email. If you'd like to subscribe, go to our website, bethtorah.ca. You can also find videos, sermons, and other content that you might enjoy. Let's conclude now with the singing of Adon Olam, page 412, followed by Kiddush, on to Musaf. Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nivra li'et nasa b'chefzo kol azay melech shemo nikra b'yacharei kichlos hakol Levado yimloch nora, v'hu haya v'hu oveh, v'hu yiyeh b'tifara, hu echad v'yein sheni, l'hamshir lo l'hachbira, b'li reishis b'li sachlis, v'lo hoz v'hamisra, hu eli v'chai goali, v'tzorchev li b'yeis tzara, hu nisi umanos li, v'naskot si b'yom ekra, b'yado afkid ruchi, Yesishan v'yahira v'yimruchi yeviyasi Adonai li v'lohira. Kiddush. Zachor esima Shabbos l'kadshoy sheishis yomim tav v'oirus l'machtecha v'shvi Shabbos alinoy aleyecha lo yisasek malachat avin chavitecha Av the chava maschem the chava gera asher b'sharecha ki sheishis yomim osal inois hashemayim v'tzoretz ziyom v'skol asher b'mayanach b'yom hashvi al kein berachan inois hem Shabbos v'yikadesheyu Savri, let me hear